Welcome everybody to The Last Mile with Ryan Leaf. There's been many avenues we've gone on this show. For me, over the last 10 years, interacting with those who work in criminal justice has been interesting, fascinating. On one side of it, I've had my warden become one of my biggest supporters, who's kind of carried me through the last 10 years. I've spoken with the DA that charged me. Ultimately, he's become a judge now and is affecting change that way. So this was a real honor for me. I've lived in Los Angeles really since I got out until about 2 years ago, and I've seen kind of where being a citizen in this city has gone. And my next guest to the show is Los Angeles' newest district attorney, Nathan Hochman. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start there. You're the new district attorney for the county of Los Angeles. That is a big ask, I would say. In particular because of, in the last 4 years, it's become a very different place to live, I would say. Under George Gaskin, there was a very hard line, and then there was a very result from the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. You ran for Attorney General of the state of California as a Republican, and that didn't work. You came back and ran as an independent for the district attorney's office, and you won. Congratulations with that. Kind of give us that blueprint of watching that happen, see everything play out, and then deciding your path to become where you're at right now.
Well, again, thank you for having me on. So the path has been interesting. I've been a centrist my whole life. Whether I was a registered Democrat for 20 years, a registered Republican for 20 years, or now an independent. And my thought is that safety turns out to be the crossover issue of 2024. And by that, I mean, I spoke over the last year and a half on the campaign side with thousands of people. I spoke to ultra-left liberals, independents, people on the far right. I spoke with Black, white, Latino, Asian groups, every different religious group out there. And across the entire 4,000 square mile plus county, put a lot of miles on my car, but went from Long Beach to Los Angeles to Lancaster, from Santa Monica to the Three Valleys, Santa Clarita, San Fernando, and San Gabriel valleys. And here's what I'm here to tell you. They don't agree on much. But when it came to their safety, turns out everyone is a parent or a son or a daughter that cares about their parent or their grandparents. And they were looking at what was going on in our society with crime not only objectively being higher on virtually every category over the last 4 years, but their own personal experiences. I would go into groups and I would say, who here has either personally or a close family member or a friend suffered from violent or property crime in the last 4 years in a way you hadn't before? And almost all the hands would go up. And so I looked at that and I said, look, this centrist sort of ideology is what is going to work here. Because I reject extreme policies. I rejected the extreme policy of my predecessor. He used to call that decarceration. Effectively meant that there were certain crimes and certain criminals that he wouldn't prosecute, not because the facts and the law weren't there, but because of his personal political agenda. I rejected that extreme, but I also reject the extreme of mass incarceration. Another idea that says we're just going to put as many people in prison without regard to the facts of the law. So I come down in what I call the hard work middle or the hard middle because it requires work. Blanket policies are inherently lazy. You got to look at each case individually, the individual defendant and their background, the crime committed and the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our public safety, and those are often the repeat offenders and they need to go to jail, versus the first-time nonviolent offender. Still has to pay a debt back to society if they violate society's laws, but that's where non-prison punishments proportional to the crime come to play, whether it's community service, restitution, pay it back if you stole something, or if you have a serious drug addiction, a diversion program that gives you a choice. You can either go to prison or you can do an 18-month rigorous rehab program that, if you succeed one day at a time, will give you a certificate at the end of it and wipe that crime off your record. That's the hard middle approach, and that approach seemed to work very well with voters here in Los Angeles County.
When will you be able to put this policy into a reality of action here? When is the first ability for you to take over and start prosecuting some of these cases?
So I started on December 3rd. In the first hour, I put it into place. And what we did is that my predecessor had enacted in his first day in office 9 special directives that basically put prohibitions on certain types of prosecutions. So those would be, for instance, prosecuting a juvenile, someone under 18, for misdemeanors, which is stealing just $100, $950. That's how you got to the point where on social media we would see 12 to 15-year-olds ride their bikes to a 7-Eleven, drop their bikes, run inside the store, ransack it, run outside, stuff their pants with stolen goods, and bike away. Because they knew that the DA's office literally had a policy saying they weren't going to get prosecuted. We got rid of that policy. We got rid of the policy dealing with gangs, where it said that if you're a violent gang member and you commit a violent crime as part of your gang affiliation, for 30 years there was a gang enhancement on the books that was prosecuted and really crippled the power of criminal street gangs. Under my predecessor, he refused, for his political reasons, to prosecute that gang enhancement. Gangs got stronger. We reversed that also on day one, along with 7 other policies.
It seems simple. It really does. I find that most of the time, especially in this day and age, there seems to be either you in the mindset of you're right or you're wrong, and you're willing to, go to the mattresses of sorts to prove you're right in this side of things, but rather understanding that, hey, maybe, yes, someone who commits a crime needs to pay for that. There's consequences to it. But there's also the understanding of what mass incarceration has done over the last 4 decades, and how that's transformed communities, especially ones that are maybe really different than the one I grew up in Montana, here in LA County.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the notion of proportional accountability is crucial. So again, you don't treat everybody the same. You really do the hard work to look into the crime, to figure out the right punishment. And I'm a big believer that you can prioritize public safety, but enact real and effective criminal justice reform at the same exact time. Let me give you an example of 2 different press conferences I've had in the last 2 weeks. One press conference announced the bringing of charges against an individual who went into a downtown LA Target with 2 empty suitcases, came out with 2 full suitcases, and was confronted by 4 Target employees. He then reached into his pocket, drew out a gun, shot 2 of them, almost one of them to death, ran away. Turns out he had done the same thing 3 days before at an ATM. We actually ended up catching him within 24 hours, and we brought the harsh gun enhancement against him, because if you use a gun in connection with a violent crime, you could be looking at 25 years to life. And we brought that enhancement. That was one press conference to make it crystal clear that we're going to bring the charges where appropriate, and we're going to keep shoppers as safe as we possibly can. But also in that 2-week period, I announced that 2 people who had been wrongfully convicted for 17 years and served 17 years in prison, I was going to release in record time, and did release them. I basically got that case on my docket on December 16th. We made the decision on December 18th to release them. The question was, could they get released before Christmas? Turns out that the Bureau of Prisons, or the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations, would have taken 2 weeks to release them. I sent our own investigators from the DA's office to 2 prisons in the middle of California. At 5 a.m., they picked them up on Friday, December 20th, because we had to get them in court by 1:30 to get them released before Christmas. They were in court by 1 o'clock. They saw their families outside prison for the first time in 17 years, and it was a fantastic hearing where the judge actually said, look, we're going to let you out. You've been wrongfully imprisoned. We lost faith in the conviction based on information that had come forward about the last 2 years. And again, I was able to say that justice takes many forms.
Were you in the courtroom that day?
Not only was I in the courtroom, but the judge remarked that I'm the first DA that he has ever seen in the courtroom for that type of proceeding. And I said to the judge, I can't imagine why a DA wouldn't want to be in a courtroom to watch justice played out in real time. And it was a great, one of the greatest courtroom experiences I've ever had. Because again, justice is important for a DA to announce convictions, arrests, and make sure people are being held accountable. When you find out that the system didn't work, that new evidence has come to light, you need to work as fast as you can to get these people out of prison. Apologize, which I did do, and make sure you do your best to make sure these mistakes don't get made in the future.
How did that feel for you? You know, it wasn't your prosecution, but it was your accountability in this moment to be the one to apologize.
You know, it's I hearken back to a statement that I read a long time ago that the U.S. Supreme Court came out with 90 years ago. And it says the prosecution always wins when justice is done. It doesn't say the prosecution always wins when you get a conviction or an arrest or a sentence. It says when justice is done. So I was in court that day watching justice being done. Made me feel great. Made me actually want to do it again as often as possible where appropriate.
I had a guest on our show a few weeks past by the name of young man by the name of J.J. Velasquez. Now, J.J. was wrongfully convicted and spent 24 years in prison in Sing Sing. And the hard line of that DA, of that district attorney's office, would not ever budge around that. And even when the evidence was, and ultimately he was exonerated. And so it's refreshing. And I think that leans to what you're talking about in the hard middle. Like, you can want something to benefit someone who's committed a crime down the line to transform their lives and still be, as you said, with the version of the gun enhancement. You're going to commit a crime with a weapon that could kill and can kill. There's going to be consequences to that. It almost is dumbfounding for me to think that people are willing to just die on the hill of one way or the other because it fits a political affiliation, I feel like.
You know, and I agree with that. I agree that it's shocking that people won't open their minds up to new information or new evidence.
Do you find that's because maybe you've lived in this world and I've been inside a prison and I understand? It almost seems like it's a perspective shift that you and I are lucky enough to have because of the interactions we've had.
Well, and I'm the first DA in LA in history that's been both a prosecutor as part of my background. I've done that for almost 10 years and a defense attorney for almost 24 years. And that does give you a 360 perspective on how the system works. Prosecutor needs to build a case beyond a reasonable doubt with legally admissible evidence. And when they do so, there should be a conviction. Defense attorneys are trying to tear that case apart. They're trying to find the holes in the case. They're trying to file motions saying that this evidence was not gathered legally and really challenge that conviction. So I bring both perspectives to the office of DA. You know, I want to make sure every deputy district attorney, and there's over 750 of them, builds those cases rock solid so that there is no question about whether or not the person is guilty and guilty of the crime charge. And I want to be able to look at those cases and take my defense mentality and try and rip them apart. See if I can find the holes before even a defense attorney or a judge does or a jury does. And if we can't bring the case, as much as we might want to, as much as we might think someone's guilty, if you cannot prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to hit the brakes.
Through the process of your deputy district attorneys taking over the new office, what does that look like in terms of course, you have deputies in place already. Is there a process in which you look to hire new ones, bring them on board more in line with your ideas and where we want to go in terms of the prosecution process?
So I'm very lucky. Not only have I entered a job which is truly the opportunity of a lifetime, but I've inherited a group of hundreds of prosecutors that are some of the best lawyers, not just here in Los Angeles, but I would say in the entire nation. They are that talented a group. By the way, a diverse group of people, whether it's racially, ethnicity, sexual orientation. I mean, literally, it's an incredible group. Politically, but the one thing they have in common is the mission. They understand that the mission truly is justice. And to give you an example of how I think these folks are on mission with myself, 98% of them voted to support the recall of my predecessor, Gascon. I mean, imagine that. 98% of your office thinks you're doing such a bad job that they want you fired or resigned. So I've inherited these people. And the reason they were upset with Gascon was not a political disagreement. He basically told them that they couldn't do their job anymore. That even if the facts and the law were there to do something, they were prohibited from doing it. And if they did, he would retaliate against them, which is why he faced more retaliation lawsuits than any DA in history. So I've been fortunate to build on the momentum that I came in with. I mean, I was able to meet with over 500 of them. Before I actually took office, I had 15 different meetings across the county to meet them. And I said, guys, you are the greatest asset of the DA's office. It's not the computers, the cases, or the courtrooms. It's the people in the courts doing justice every single day. And I said, my job then as a DA is to maximize the greatest asset of the office, which is them. This is manna from heaven compared to the way that the prior DA treated them. In fact, most of them said that they had spent more time meeting with me, about an hour and a half, than they had with the prior DA in over 4 years. And so that's how we will build that esprit de corps back in the DA's office. We'll transfer that over to law enforcement, which has been demoralized. And I mean, they are literally 10 and 20% down in their own ranks as far as hiring goes. We'll bring that over to victim groups, victim families that were been abandoned by the prior DA. He wouldn't send even a prosecutor with a victim family when they were confronting the murder of their son or their daughter at a parole hearing. We've restored, that representation. And the public. The public was fed up. They were fed up of watching crime get out of control, and it looked like that the DA's office, or not look like, the DA's office had policies that emboldened criminals to do these crimes.
I find that anytime you have someone who makes such sweeping generalizations when a big moment happens like it did in 2020, that looks more like a dictatorship than it does anything else. And so that speaks to exactly what you were trying to say. When we come back, we're going to talk to District Attorney Nathan Hochman from Los Angeles County here about how much the last mile has played an effect on his mindset with this hard middle approach. Right here on The Last Mile with Ryan Leaf. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody, to The Last Mile with Ryan Leaf. Fascinating guest today, the new District Attorney of Los Angeles County, Nathan Hochman here is joining us. We talked about the last mile. Chris was very adamant to me about how exactly the approach you are looking at in terms of what you can do to transform someone's life for when they get out, because there are consequences to your actions, and that's the removal of freedom. That's exactly what the incarceration is. The process then is to find a way to make sure they can contribute to society when they get back out and not become a drain to that society, into that community. You want it to be propped up and move forward, and the last mile does exactly that. Speak to what the last mile has meant to you, your understanding of how it can affect that change, and fit into exactly what you are trying to accomplish.
So as I was on the campaign trail, and since I've been the DA starting in December 3rd, I've said that the DA actually has 3 roles in the criminal justice system. I call it the before, the during, and the after. Before, you actually got to reach kids. You got to start probably about 5th grade, middle school, high school. You got to make sure that the DA's office, law enforcement, former prisoners are getting out into the schools to tell kids that they have different paths in the society. Here's what a negative path and bad decisions look like. Here's what positive paths and good role models look like. The during is what we discussed earlier about this hard middle proportional approach, that if someone does come into the criminal justice system, how they're going to be treated. But the after focuses on prisoners, because that is one of the bigger pipelines to criminal conduct in our society, is people coming out of prisons without any skill sets to go back into their neighborhoods. And look, there isn't much they can actually do. They in many cases, they haven't gotten a proper education. They haven't gotten through any type of mentorship or any type of program, a skill set. So they go back to a life of crime. In LA County, the recidivism rate is over 50% of people getting out of prison and being back in prison within 2 years, having committed new crimes and hurting additional victims. So I had the opportunity to meet Michael Harris when I was on the campaign trail. And when I met him, he's an absolutely fascinating person. And his life story is sort of a testament to the power of the human spirit, to the power of really redemption and rebuilding your life. And what he told me about is when he got out of prison, there was a program that he got very involved with called The Last Mile. I said, Michael, tell me about it. And he described a program where they were teaching coding to prisoners in prison, starting with San Quentin, that they were helping them then get a job when they got out, and that the recidivism rate was virtually zero. I said, tell me more, because I don't believe it. And he introduced me to Chris Redlitz, and I started to learn more about the program. I mean, I first didn't quite honestly believe that prisoners would want to sign up for coding classes. Then I found out that there's wait lists in these prisons because they want the classes so much. Then I said, well, can they really do it? Can people, who end up in prison in these conditions actually learn how to code? Then I found out they're fantastic coders. And then I said, is there any chance anyone's going to hire these people when they get out, even if they have this skill set, and give them really good jobs so that they won't want to go commit more crimes? And then I found out that there's even a waiting list, that The Last Mile helps these people get these jobs, and they become productive people again. So when I've been on the campaign trail and I get to this point of my speech on before, during, and after, I said, let me give you an example of a program that I support, and I described The Last Mile.
Well, that probably goes a long way for someone like Chris. I'm with you on that. What prison did and what does to a lot of people is it removes hope. And, I mean, there's always that self-degradation you take yourself through when you look in the mirror because of what you've become, where you've ended up, what prisons have become like in terms of a continuation of punishment rather than a rehabilitative place. And there's a reason why we're the most populated prison population in the entire world, right? It's another society. For-profit prisons are one that are existent and things like that. But the hope part of it, the idea that when I get out, I can have a chance at being what, when I was a kid, I thought I could be, or what I had in terms of in Michael's scenario, an incredible business mind. I find a lot of people who are incarcerated from time to time have maybe some of the most intelligent thought processes and have just used them for the wrong and negative and toxic things. And when generated towards the positive and healthy, unbelievable things happen. So it's been really special to see that take off and for you to take on that part of it. What policies do you find, especially locally, like we're talking about county jails and things like that, what policies you need to shift to achieve these types of goals in your opinion?
What's interesting, and there is a difference between the local jails and the state prisons. At the state prison level, they have more time. I hate to put it that way. A lot of these programs require a year or more to go through and require a pretty rigorous training in order to get to the qualification stage where you can get a certificate. They call it the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I don't see much rehabilitation going on in many of these prisons. In fact, if the Last Mile were to greatly, exponentially expand its programs in the California state prisons, it would be fantastic. And similar programs, the programs that really give prisoners a useful skill set. So when they come out, they can deal with sort of modern society circa 2025 and have something to offer it that someone is in turn willing to pay for. The county jails are different. It is a nut that I am going to crack because they don't offer the type of rehabilitation services that they absolutely should, even if it's just, people are there for months or a year or so. I hope they will, because we are not helping that population.
Because the preventative aspect to that, right? Let's say they can't afford bail,
right,
or bond, and they have to spend their time there. Imagine it being rehabilitative in a way for when they go to trial, if there is a plea in place where they can then go back to their communities and stuff like that, that they've actually done some work through the process. Preemptively would be, it would expedite your job in a way that would make it so much easier.
100%. I view it as an investment. I heard the numbers. It's roughly $128,000 to keep someone in prison or jail, for that matter, for a year. The Last Miles program, roughly $6,000 a year. So you put aside even the compassion part. If you're just practical and you think, okay, I can make a $6,000 investment and save $128,000, then I get a productive citizen who's then hopefully going to not commit more crimes, pay taxes, and make society a little bit better. That is a smart investment. If you're putting, again, aside the compassion part, that our society should be willing to make.
A big part of all this is when an individual is released and they've gone through this programming, and the idea of fair chances hiring. And I wanted to explore with you a little bit, what steps will be put in place to support these types of fair chance hirings, and what can constituents expect over the first 30, 60, 90 days through this process.
Well, again, on working with the prison population or the jail population, our jails are pretty much close to maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So we are looking for opportunities, especially for the low-level offenders, to allow them to go out and go to community-based programs and ideally help improve themselves along the way. With respect to prosecutions, we're going to hold people accountable. We're going to go back to doing our jobs. So again, we have to prioritize that public safety, but do it in a smart way. And we are going to definitely attack the two pipelines. The pipeline of kids making bad mistakes, usually when they become teenagers or later, and prisoners getting out of prison or jails without the skill sets, and again, making some bad mistakes. We can make serious dents in both pipelines. So the youth pipeline, the prisoner pipeline, into criminal activity in our society will go a long way to restoring safety in our communities.
What did you find over the last few years in terms of the data on where individuals chose to start committing more and more offenses? Is it from the changes that Gascon put into place, the value of what a prosecutable crime was in terms of theft? Where have you seen the rise in that crime, and where do you think you're going to first initially try to hit that the hardest to combat it?
So the studies show that criminals respond to two things: the certainty that they will get caught, and the fact that if they do get caught, there will be meaningful consequences for their action, or in this case, punishments for their action. What happened with Gascon and my predecessor is that when you go ahead and publicly say that we're not going to prosecute certain crimes and certain criminals, not because there's a deficiency in the facts or the law, but because that's his personal political agenda, the people who are eventually going to listen are the criminals. And they did. Gangs only got stronger. Kids went ahead and were ripping off 7-Elevens and whatnot, doing street takeovers, basically saying, look, if you're not going to enforce the laws, or where is the line that you're going to finally enforce, we're going to keep testing the line. So my response back to them is, look, the laws are the lines. I'm going to consistently, fairly, and impartially enforce them. And yes, there will be real consequences on the other side. Because my goal is not to fill the prisons to the breaking point. If anything, that's the failure of the criminal justice system. My goal is to deter criminals from committing crimes in the first place, thus saving a whole lot of victims. And so again, if someone thinks I'm bluffing, they've never seen me play poker. I'm a horrible bluffer. And I don't bluff in poker. I don't bluff certainly when it comes to criminal justice decisions.
I find that your stoicism when speaking about it, I think would or should frighten criminals, period, because it almost has a Terminator X little look to it when I look at it, which I think is a good thing. The accountability part of all this is the thing that I hold dearest. I want to be shown the mirror. And again, I have different life experiences, and I know how it turns out, and I know how it benefited me. In the long run, what you would hope for as a district attorney that is holding a mirror up to your community and trying to change something, that when it's all said and done and they look back into it years later, they can thank you for what that looks like. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do for somebody who's being shown that mirror. When somebody's showing me my defects of character or some of the choices that I made, it's really difficult to look at that. And it doesn't mean that the person that held it up to me doesn't maybe care about me the most. And I think that's the hardest thing for anybody who lives in a community that sees somebody trying to prosecute them for something. That person may ultimately care about them the most. And it just never translates until it may be too late.
You know, I'm very, very impressed by your journey, and a lot of journey of the people I've met through the last mile, because it is hard. You're right. Putting that mirror up, many people never get there. So the fact that you got there, were willing to stare at it, probably over long periods of times and nights, and it was incredibly difficult, but then you learned from it, is a true testament to the inner core of your character. I believe a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people have that capacity. And the only question is what will finally trigger it in their lives. You know, in my perfect world, we'd reach you before you went down that path.
Right.
You know, whatever age that would have to have been. You know, I was recently in Lancaster prison. I was talking to two guys in their 30s who were there for life. They happened to be in the Pause for Life program. This is where they actually get a dog assigned to them, and they do they actually teach this dog how to be obedient over 8 weeks and then give it to someone who needs a dog, a trained dog. And I'm asking each one of them, they're in their early 30s. They each shot multiple people when they were 18. They were part of gangs. I said, if you could take the experience that you have right now at about 32 and go back to your 18-year-old self, would there be any chance you could convince that 18-year-old self not to pull the trigger? They both looked at me and they said, no way. I was actually surprised. I thought that was an easy question. They would just say, of course, I could convince myself. They said, it's too late. 18, by the time we were 18, we'd been in the gangs 6 or 7 years. That was our family. They said to shoot someone, we're going to shoot them. You needed to get to that person 10 or 11.
You had to be the one that was the thing bigger than them before the thing that in their eyes was bigger than them came along.
Right.
And that usually stems from family, you know, father figures in your life. We had Larry Miller on recently. He's the chairman of the Jordan brand, alongside Phil Knight and Michael Jordan at Nike and everything like that. He grew up in Philly, and he was this straight-A student. And then as he got a little bit older, what he saw, the older kids and everybody that were in the street, was the thing that the fellowship that he wanted and needed. And sometimes the disenfranchised, which is where you're going to have to deal with a lot of your time, they just want to be seen or heard. And the individuals that listen and see them, and maybe for the wrong reasons, but to recruit, are these gang affiliations.
Right. You hit it right on the head there. Each of these individuals that I was referring to before they did tell me, they came from dysfunctional families. Their fathers weren't there, and the game became their family. You know, it was, so again, too late to hit them at 18 and try to change the course of their life. So our goal is to try and get these kids when they're young, impressionable enough to be willing to hopefully listen and at least educate them enough of what the bad choices look like. And as importantly, show them good role models and say, this is Michael Harris now. This is your role model.
Yeah.
You should grow up and do the things that Michael Harris is doing now, and you will be a fantastic human being.
Do you know what's been a bit of a roadblock for that? That I found is that a lot of school officials or affiliates, or even the parents, are fearful that someone who comes in and starts talking about it is going to plant the seed in their child's minds. Like the idea of not talking about, sex is going to make them not try to go out and have sex and have babies, and things like that, and get pregnant. You speak about it so you can inform and educate and make them understand. So that's been one of the bigger roadblocks. So if that's something you run into down the line, especially here districtly with local schools and stuff like that, it needs to be made very clear that, like, if you don't talk about it, they're going to do it anyway, but not informed through the process, whatever that looks like.
Oh, I mean, that is such a 18th century perspective.
Yes.
I mean, these kids with the access they have on their phones to information, whether it's, again, bad information,
Yep.
Information dealing, I mean, you can just get it through modern culture almost to see what bad choices look like. Again, focusing on Michael Harris, when he gives his talk, it is, the kids cannot peel their eyes away, because he is talking about hitting the heights of the drug culture. I mean, he was the number one crack cocaine dealer in Los Angeles, and served a lengthy prison sentence from it, but didn't let that end his life. From prison, the guy had the fortitude to basically co-found one of the bigger record labels out there, Death Row Records, and then work hard to deal with prisoner programs, work hard with kids from prison. I mean,
that's a choice.
It's a choice. And again, he always had the capacity, but he finally decided to use that capacity in productive ways. And that is, his message is to all those kids, you have the capacity. There are paths out there. They're not necessarily easy, and they're not necessarily fun, and they definitely take a lot of hard work. But the reward will outstrip anything else you could put out there.
Yeah, the idea that you always have a choice. You always have a fork in the road, no matter what it looks like, and you have a choice to deal with it in a healthy, positive way or a negative and toxic one. Either way leads to a consequence, whether that's a positive or negative one. And sometimes we just have to be beat over the head with it or humbled in a way, hopefully before it's too late. So, speaking of Michael Harris, I just saw somebody walk by that looked just like him. So, we're going to take a quick little break here, and we're going to come back right here on the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. Special occasion here. One of our next guests on our show, Michael Harris. Harry O is kind enough to jump in here alongside District Attorney Nathan Hochman. How did you guys meet?
How did we meet?
Well, we actually had a mutual friend, a lawyer, who I was running for office, and he said to me, "You got to meet Michael Harris." And I said, "Okay, why Michael Harris?" And he described your journey over the last probably 40 years.
Yeah.
And I was mesmerized. I mean, I'd represented people who had, engaged in criminal conduct. I hadn't really met too many people who had achieved what Michael did while incarcerated. And then, and really just transformed himself and everyone around him in doing that. I mean, it was an amazing story. In fact, when I heard the story before I met Michael, I thought, okay, you're making stuff up. And then I met Michael, and I said, you actually undersold him, which is fantastic. And then when Michael told me about his connection with the Last Mile, that's what got me supercharged to find out what the Last Mile was about. And again, he undersold the Last Mile. And I got to meet Chris and the whole Last Mile team and really research it. It really is one of the most effective programs for giving prisoners a skill set, helping them get out, get that first job, and breaking the recidivism spiral that so many of them go through.
Before I get to you, Michael, around the district attorney, what made you choose to trust in that this was someone who effectively changed their life through that process? Because listen, to take chances on us is more of the exception. The rule is you're viewed, you're judged, you're passed along. What was that about Michael that made you go, I believe what he's trying to do here, and I'm willing to essentially attach my reputation to him as the next district attorney to be a part of it.
That's that trust. I'll call it trust, but verify. Comes from my background as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Turns out when you represent a lot of people who go through the criminal justice system, you understand that there are certain ones that make mistakes and never learn from them. And sadly, will make those mistakes over and over again. And then there's a smaller category of people who make those mistakes, but then truly turn their lives around and learn from them. And when I got to speak with Michael, when I got to learn more about him, I recognized that he was in that latter category. And in fact, was one of the standouts in that latter category, because not only did he want to change his own life, he wanted to change others' lives. And that, to take your experience and then use it to help other people, that is a seriously rare quality.
It is, and it's one that I've found can transform your life. Michael, you the process that you went through, what others have gone through to be justice impacted and spend the amount of time there to walk out and see the federal government then try to take more time away from you for you to understand what the last mile trial is trying to accomplish, and then to see a district attorney that wants to be hard on crime, but also has an understanding of what that looked like. What made you look at this man and say, hey, this is somebody I want to go on a ride with to help try to change the lives of the people impacted in my community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm explaining it, but first today is it's a hard day for our city, and I just wanted all the prayers to go out to firefighters, men and women that represent this city, and also the prisoners who also help put out the fires. They're very important to our rescue team out there. So, yeah, meeting him Mr. Hochman was different. He was different. You felt different. His whole conversation about, he wanted to make sure he bring law and order back to the city, but he understood that it was some underlying situations that had to be dealt with people that's incarcerated. He understood that everybody that's in prison is not bad. They made bad choices and bad decisions. And so we started to kind of talk about my experience and how those programs help change and alter my thinking and my ability to be able to help create those kind of programs, knowing what the piece that's missing from people who come from the type of communities that I come from. And the fact that he was just as interested in that as he was and making sure people are accountable for the crimes that they commit, I just thought it was a balance there, which I'm not used to seeing. And I'm not saying that other people don't have those qualities. It's just seeing it in him, it was just genuine, you knew. And like I told him, my support is 100%, because I know you're what the city needs. You're what these people who come in front of the justice system needs, an even hand. And I just press without understanding or not doing the due diligence. He's the type of person want to know about the human being so that he can make sure that they putting people in a situation that can ultimately make a decision to come back out, because like a lot of people don't understand, a lot of these people don't have life and they're coming back out. So when you have a captive audience, what do you do to help facilitate their skill set? Because the lack of skill set causes people to be drifters, and anything can happen. But if I got a skill, if I got a talent, I'm going to exercise that talent. And so when people is incarcerated and you have an opportunity to learn a trade, not just self-help groups, that was very important to have those as well, so you can think different. But now I need to be able to be different. I need to be able to come out with marketable skills and be able to take care of my family without even considering a criminal act to do so. And I just knew he was the right guy for the job.
That's pretty impressive. I would suspect, coming from somebody who really is a product of this community, right? Grew up in East LA, understands the community's hardships it's been through, the values, and then to have been, set aside by the state to then come back and want it represented in the most positive way had to have been a huge influence in you.
I was and am incredibly grateful for Michael's support, because Michael doesn't necessarily give it easily. This was something I had to earn, but it was something absolutely worthwhile to earn, because he speaks with a voice from a community that I didn't grow up in, but he did, and they looked to him for his insights and his wisdom to support whoever he will support. Again, they don't do it blindly. He, I'm sure, had to explain how he came to the point where he wanted to support me. But Michael's right. Once you get Michael's support, it is 100%. And he has been incredibly valuable as a resource to bounce ideas through, and make sure that I'm not, I'll come up with a couple of good ideas, but they might not work with the community. And when I relay them to Michael, he's very, very happy and insightful to point out, okay, you might want to explain it like this. You might want to focus on that. That resonates in our community better than what you're thinking is going to happen. And he's right. Because ultimately, the idea is communication. I need to communicate ideas of both protecting people, prioritizing public safety, but making sure that they have trust in the system. So when I tell people, look, I'm the only prosecutor or DA who's ever prosecuted a police officer before, and I'm not going to hesitate to prosecute police officers that cross the line. But I also believe that the overwhelming number of police officers, and this is exemplified right now in our community dealing with these fires, are doing a very difficult and dangerous job as well as they can. And those officers deserve our respect, our admiration, and our partnership. Same thing with the firefighters and first responders. Sure, there can be ones that make mistakes, and if they're criminal mistakes, I will absolutely deal with it. But they need to know that the ones that are doing a great job have our support. And I want to communicate that message very clearly. And equally, I communicate the message to people who want to take advantage of the situation we're going through with the fires, because there are people who are going to loot. There are people who are going to run scams on the people who've lost their houses and their businesses. There are going to be people trying to rip off these people. Those people, unfortunately, are about to experience a justice system different than the last 4 years, because they will be arrested, they will be prosecuted, and they will be punished. And I'm hoping that once we do a first wave of it, everyone learns from it and stops doing it, because I want deterrence truly to work, because it'll save a whole lot of victims in the process.
Well, I can say this has been incredibly enlightening. And who would have thought all these years that the dream team in Los Angeles County would be Michael Harris and Nathan Hochman running it together. So incredibly proud of you both. I don't know how much that means coming from someone like me, but it
means everything.
You want to see the change.
Okay.
You want to see the change in what you believe, and I think that is evidently possible with you. And I know you have work to do, my friend. So we're going to get you out of here. But thank you so much for taking the time. LA's new district attorney, Nathan Hochman. Thank you for joining us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.